Imagine being in prison for 7 years for a crime you didn't commit. Donald Stahlbach, a German man, was accused of robbing a bank and embezzling assets. But despite all the evidence and proof he presented, and despite his illness, no one expressed it. The biggest problem was when he was accused of stealing more than 90 kilos of gold. Here, the story will certainly be very strange, but, could this man really be the perpetrator? Today's story is a strange story, and its events are closer to the imagination. But the tragedy is that it is true, and it happened on the ground of reality. Hello, I am Omar, and I enlightened your homeland. First, in order for you to understand the sequence of events in the story, let's focus on them correctly until we reach the second story. Our story today has many events. We will start our story when the first story took place. On December 19, 1991, in the German city of Nuremberg, at around 3:15 p.m., a thief entered a bank called Sparkus. The man was tall and very well dressed. He was wearing a hat, a scarf, and glasses, and they were all black. The man was carrying a gun and wearing gloves. When he reached one of the employees, he raised the gun and threatened to give him all the money he had. Of course, the employee did not resist and gave him a sum of 54,000 German marks. The mark is the currency that was circulating before the euro. After putting the money in a bag, he quickly left the bank and got into a taxi driven by a woman. This woman was the one who took him to the bank, and she waited for him outside until he finished his business and got in with her. Of course, the woman did not understand anything before he got in with her, and she thought he was just a customer like everyone else. When he got in, he raised the gun and forced her to get to a certain place, and then he got out and ran away. The taxi driver did not notice his features accurately, but she noticed that he was tall, more than 190 centimeters tall, and he was very well dressed, and he was about 35 years old. Unfortunately for the thief, this bank had a surveillance camera, and she filmed him during the robbery, and this is the picture they got from him. After that, the details of this operation were published in detail in the news, hoping that anyone would recognize the thief and inform the authorities. During this time, there was a police officer following the news, and when he saw this news, he immediately recognized the man in the picture, whose name was Donald Stahlbach, nicknamed Big Mac. Here you will ask, how did a police officer recognize him, and why did my police officer recognize him? We will understand this point in the events of the story. The unfortunate thing here is that Donald, the main suspect, when he was arrested, told the officials that he had nothing to do with the robbery. And of course, something wrong happened, and he was not afraid of this accusation at all. Other than that, he is basically suffering from osteoporosis. This disease causes him to gain weight and many other things. Here directly, the first thing that will come to your mind is that this thief, like him and others, commits the crime, and when he falls on his head, he escapes, and he pretends to be a decent person, and he has nothing to do with these operations. But be patient, because in this story, you will not know the truth until the end. During the investigation with him, the officials told him, "You are accused of robbing a bank and harassing employees," and they showed him the picture they got from the surveillance camera, and they put her and his picture next to each other. Despite the quality of the ugly picture, but as you can see, the resemblance was very large, especially in the size of the body. Donald told them, "I don't know what you mean, but I didn't carry out this operation, and basically I have an unofficial argument, which is that at the time of the incident, I was not in the city of Nuremberg." What? How could he not have carried out this operation? The problem is that carrying out a robbery on a bank is not less than 5 years. But our friend was adamant in his opinion, so here, to remove their doubts about him and make sure that he really has nothing to do with it, they told him, "We will show you the employees of the bank, and the driver of the taxi that the thief was riding with," and he told them, "Okay, I have no problem." Here he entered a completely empty room, and there was only a large mirror and a light on it, and suddenly 16 people entered, bank employees, taxi driver, and clients were inside the bank during the robbery operation. When they looked at him carefully, they said in one letter, "This man is tall and clear, and of course he is the thief." After these people testified, and despite Donald's insistence that he is innocent, he was sent to prison until they obtained conclusive evidence to convict him of the operation. During this time, in order to cut the doubt for sure, the investigators decided to invite an expert in ear fingerprints to analyze the middle fingerprint, which was visible in the image, with the fingerprint of Donald's beloved ear. Of course, for those who do not know, the fingerprint of the human ear, glory be to God, is unique just like the fingerprint of the finger. When we look at it, we think that all ears are similar to each other, but they differ from each person in shape and features, and like the fingerprint of the ear, a movement is used to reach the identity of the thief. Anyway, Donald remained in prison for 2 years, until the expert finished the examination, and the court began, and all evidence was collected regarding the case. Indeed, on January 25, 1994, he was summoned to court. The strange thing here is that there is nothing to link him to the robbery operation, there is no evidence or threads, no, on the contrary, all the evidence points to his robbery. During the robbery operation, he was 250 kilometers away from the site, he was in the city of Leuna in a hotel, and the bank was in the city of Nuremberg. So imagine that they called the owner of the hotel, and confirmed that at that time Donald was at the hotel. And besides, I told you that the thief who entered the bank was not wearing gloves. During the robbery operation, he left more than 12 fingerprints in the crime scene, and when they compared it with Donald's fingerprints, they did not match. They found that the taxi car in which he ran away was full of fingerprints, and none of them matched his fingerprints. A strange thing, okay, and on what basis did they link the operation to him? First, the reason is the testimony of the bank employees, and the client they were in, and the taxi driver as well. And imagine that even after the fingerprints did not match, the employee and the taxi driver were present in court, and then they confirmed that 99% he is the thief. So here, the main character in the case was an expert in fingerprints. When they compared Donald's fingerprints with the thief's, he gave them his evaluation and a million proofs that they are exactly the same. Donald here was like a madman, and although he shouted and cursed the expert a million times, no one took his words at all. And the judge took all the proofs and evidences that he gave them, and sentenced him to 7 years in prison. And they removed him and put him in prison, and the news spread in the papers with the title, "Because of the Fat in the Left Ear, Muthneb." In prison, he was alone in a private cell, and he was deprived of social activity, and he stayed in the cell for 23 hours a day, and he did not talk to anyone, and he did not have a TV or a radio to have fun in. For those who do not know, in many prisons in several countries, prisoners are allowed to have a radio or TV, but Donald was deprived of these things, and all this because he did not confess to the crime. If he confessed and told them that he was the one who carried out this operation, the penalty would have been reduced for him. And not only that, in the period of prison, he had a brain tumor and his weight increased a lot, and he stayed in this state until he was released from prison on February 14, 2001. His sentence was not reduced by a day or an hour, he was released after 7 years in prison. Oh man, I don't know why they were so desperate for him. The man, after he was released, tried to forget the past and open a new page in his life, but only a few days after he was released from prison, he received a call from the public prosecutor's office in Nuremberg and he was told to quickly hire a lawyer related to the bank robbery. Donald Horn was like his mother claimed him, and he thought he was accused of a new brain tumor operation, so he first hired a lawyer to get rid of the subject, but later they found out that the subject was related to the brain tumor that he was imprisoned for, because the police were able to arrest the real culprit who carried out the brain tumor operation. Indeed, Donald was innocent as he said, and he was not the one who carried out the brain tumor operation. The criminal had evidence and carried out a series of brain tumor operations on banks, and he always used the same technique. He reached the bank, stole it, and ran away in a taxi, and after arresting him, he was sentenced to 11.5 years in prison. The strange thing is that his body was identical to Donald's, the shape, the length, and the shape were similar to each other in a strange way. When they compared the fingerprints in the crime scene, they were exactly the same as his fingerprints. Can you imagine, guys? Donald was sentenced to 7 years in prison for a crime he did not commit. Of course, what should happen here? Of course, he should get compensation from the government for every day he spent in prison, and indeed, the government gave compensation, but the amount was very low, they only gave him 24,000 euros. After getting out of prison, he lived in a shared apartment with former prisoners, and he spent most of his time reading books to try to do something in his life, despite the diseases he was suffering from, overweight and brain tumor, and the doctor told him that his survival is a miracle. There is an important point here that I must explain to you, which is the fingerprint expert. I said that when the expert compared Donald's fingerprint with the thief's fingerprint in the picture, he confirmed that they were exactly the same. Here, this person was Donald's first enemy, and he raised a lawsuit against him in court, because if he was wrong in his case, God knows how many cases he was wrong in before and after this story. Indeed, the court accepted the lawsuit, and in 2007, he imposed a financial compensation of €150,000 that the expert must pay Donald. His excuse was that he made a mistake in the examination. Here, Donald's story spread like wildfire everywhere in Germany, and everyone heard about the story of the man who was imprisoned for 7 years of darkness, and he began to receive calls from TV channels to interview him, and he appeared in several programs, and this thing increased his fame more and more, and he started to get money like a lie, and he tried to do a lot of things. For example, from each interview on TV, he appears and talks about his story, and when he appears, he earns between €5,000 and €10,000, and when he appears, he is wearing a t-shirt with the name of a company he is advertising, which means that the man is crazy and exploiting everything, and we said that he earned €150,000 from the expert who humiliated him and put him in prison for darkness, and after a while, he entered the field of selling and buying watches, and when he had a respectable amount, he opened a jewelry store, and money was poured on him from everywhere. In addition to jewelry, he began to sell gold and jewelry, and after a while, he met a German man named Frank. This person lived in Ghana, a West African country, and Donald knew that at that time Ghana was the second largest gold-producing country in the world, and he began to deal with Frank to send him gold and diamonds from there, and when he liked the story, he offered him the idea of opening a store, and they really opened the store together. But when Donald saw that this operation needed patience and a long time, he forgot about it, and he kept doing what he did, which is a jewelry store, and he stayed in this state until 2009, but something happened to Donald, neither you nor I expected, which is that he was sentenced to 9 seconds in prison, and this time it was stranger and more complicated than before.